You've also had a previous presentation on coastal environment, but you might recall last week, 2 weeks ago when we started the stage 2 chapters, we decided to delay this to stage 3 so there could be connections made if necessary to other stage 3 chapters, for example, natural hazards and natural and cultural heritage. So Fiona will just briefly go through this again and make those connections for you or answer any questions. Unfortunately, you won't be getting the natural hazards until next Friday, as we discussed.
No, that's right.
No resolutions today.
Thank you, Brigitte. Good afternoon, everybody. How do I move this along? Okay, right here. As Brigitte explained, you've already had this presentation to you, so I'll keep it relatively brief and just highlight the key points. I'm leading the second part of the natural hazards chapter, and of course you'll also see now that it's been delayed, it's coinciding with the release of the natural and cultural heritage chapter, which I think adds a lot of value because a lot of the questions that we've had from the Minister's representatives and from others is that questions that are really answered by the natural and cultural heritage chapter. So just moving along, that the chapter reflects the direction in high-level documents like the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. The new New Zealand Policy Statement issued in 2010 updates the earlier one, and it provides a lot more guidance to the Council now as it prepares its replacement plan. In particular, it's giving policy direction on the extent and characteristics of the coastal environment, heritage and treaty matters, public open space, land or water held under other acts and legislation, Indigenous biodiversity, preservation of the natural character, coastal hazards, to name the key ones. The Regional Policy Statement provides sort of similar direction in terms of objectives and policies, including increasing knowledge and awareness of coastal matters. We've also benefited from new information that's been commissioned to inform other chapters in particular, and of course you're aware of information on coastal hazards that we've also had commissioned. Just moving along now. What does the chapter, I've carried on that, what does the chapter look like? We can move along, please. It now has an overarching, fairly slim chapter of about 8 pages with overarching direction on identifying the coastal environment by way of an overlay, and the objectives and policies provide guidance on any development under other zones or other district-wide rules that apply within that overlay. There's a very slim coastal zone which rolls over many of the provisions in the existing Conservation 1A zone in the operative city plan, and so that zone largely covers those high-use recreational and habitat areas adjoining the city. So with the exception of the coastal zone, this chapter is largely relying on other zones and district-wide rules to implement its policies. So it's rather unique in the overall district plan in that regard. To get an idea of where the coastal environment overlay occurs, there's a high-level diagram. Of course, when you look at the planning maps, you'll see that coastal environment, the landward extent of it, notated on all those maps that adjoin or overlap the coastal marine area boundary of the territorial boundary along the coastline. To determine the coastal environment, we used our technical experts to assess a number of characters or criteria in terms of natural coastal character, the landscape and ecology, identified coastal hazards, the interaction with the coastal marine area, the boundary, which is mean high water springs, access to the coast by road and recreational land in that area, and also items of historic heritage value. And overall, we applied a practical and reasonable approach to try and provide an outcome that provides some clarity to landowners and the general public about what's proposed, and to be able to have something that's justified and defensible. So if we look at that, just before we move on, I'll just point to a little area, hold my hand steady if I can, just along the top there. And largely that's sort of the part that adjoins the Christchurch city area, and that's the part over which the coastal zone applies within, I should say. It's not all of that area, but it's within that general area north of the Avon Heathcote estuary. Just move along to the next slide. You'll see the coastal zone. Move along to the next slide. Yeah. And the next one over, we'll just move along again, please. And you'll see the coastal zone marked there. Now, there's very limited provision for activities in that area. It's largely owned by the public, managed by the council, and it rolls over existing provisions. It's and the operative plan, as I said earlier, and that's generally providing for what are called broadly or defined conservation activities, which I'd rather describe as habitat management, and some recreational activities, passive recreation activities, which are seating, tables, that sort, the likes. And then we've got recognition of things like the Surf Yacht Club and the Life's Coast Guard facilities, that sort of thing. They need to go through a consent process if they want to upgrade or extend. Otherwise, it's fairly much sort of business as usual in many ways. To give you,
is that a consenting process within the council?
No, it would be the normal consenting process.
So it's through Environment Canterbury, is it?
No, through us, I beg your pardon.
Sorry,
yes.
Because I'm just wondering about the pier at New Brighton, because it doesn't kind of happily fit within any of those descriptions with the library and cafe.
It would probably be the marine structure. We've got a category in the, if you look at the zone provisions for marine structures, and I think from memory the definition effectively says that it's structures that are owned by the council. I haven't provided the definition there, but if you have a copy of your definitions, you'll see that marine structures applies to structures owned by the council. I suspect in that situation, because the pier is also located in the water beyond Men High Water Springs, there would be a joint consent process required for that. And of course, we do that sort of thing all the time.
There's a library and cafe associated. It's not just the pier, the marine structure, as it were.
That's right. I'm not sure in terms of the practical application in that regard, but our consent people are dealing with that sort of thing all the time. So it'll be.
I just know that the community, has a desire to look at some other options on the foreshore there. Well, not foreshore, but not the technical foreshore, but on the car park.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but it would just require consent. That's
yes.
And if it didn't go out beyond mean high water.
That's right. Yes, I'd have to check the maps to actually see whether the library facility fell within the coastal zone. I'm not entirely sure that it does. I think it might be slightly landward of that zone.
Oh, okay. All right, so it's not very far into the...
It's effectively the back of the dunes.
The back of the dune system.
More or less, yeah. And of course there's a wee bit of a
because
crossover there.
there's a cut in the dune system there.
That's right. So that's why I'm not entirely sure.
Right.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay, no, thank you. Yanni, did you have a question?
Just in regards to the information that we've had, that there's certain provision where coastal areas, if the land changes and gets to a certain point, it reverts to Crown title. This is the stuff that Hugo's been emailing us about. Is that covered in this section?
Consideration has been given to that sort of thing, yes. But we don't actually deal with it here per se. This is not the area to deal with it, but certainly, like the unit manager, Helen Beaumont's been dealing with Mr. Christensen in that regard.
So just in terms of our district plan, is there anything that we need to be thinking of either putting in or taking out that would give some clarity over those properties?
I'm not totally familiar with the concern you're raising, but I think it is largely addressed under other legislation. I'm aware
my understanding, in simple terms, is that if the land's dropped to a certain point, a certain height,
yes,
then that land then reverts to Crown title because becomes part of the coastal area because it's so low.
Yeah, I accept that there is legislation governing that. I just don't know the details of it. Okay. If you need that clarified, we can.
If we can maybe just get something back before we make the final decision, that would be really
okay. Yep.
Cool. Great. Thanks.
I'm just wondering, within the plan, is there anything which you refer to the cut in the dunes, which I think we're sort of familiar with, places where it's cut? Does the plan allow for the cut, say, to be restored somehow
Yes, yes it does. Cuts in the dune, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
Cuts in the dune,
Yes,
yeah.
certainly.
And I'm coming from the point of view, obviously, of preventing tsunami.
Yes, yes, it does. Anything, there's a threshold in terms of earthworks, and that would probably trigger a resource consent. And that the council itself operates or manages its dunes under a resource consent it currently has from the regional council, and so a similar process would be invoked through any movement of over the certain threshold, which I think is something like 50 square metres.
Can I just clarify, in terms of the dunes themselves, there's a proposal that came out of the girl in the wheelchair, Ella, from a number of North Beach people to try and put a walkway along within the dunes, within the 55-metre area of the dunes in North Beach. Would that be in any way constrained by these
That
things?
should be, again, if you check the definition of conservation activities, there's some provision for walkways in there.
Okay, so you could...
But again, you know, that would be under the jurisdiction of the council's management of those areas.
David?
I just want to clarify the talk about cutting in dunes at the moment. In periods of high storm, yes, we do get a line that cuts down in the dune, and really it depends on the height of the dune where the cut is higher or lower. There's no distinction. The sea makes no distinction between the height. It's just a straight line down the beach, and the higher the dune, the higher the escarpment, the longer it takes to repair. The lower the dune, the quicker it repairs.
It was my inappropriate use of the word cut. What I meant was that the dune system's been cut out completely where the pier's been built, where the library and everything is. There is no dune
And the
system
cut
other.
out,
Yeah, that's all I was referring to. I wasn't talking
The
about.
same analogy applies. The erosion at where the dunes have been cut out is no different to where it's the line.
No, but
inward.
all we were asking for is what is the line for the coastal zone? And that's what we're going to get clarified, because we don't know how far back it goes.
Well, that in itself is quite a problem, because in varying parts of the coastline, the accretion is bigger than others. Tim Sinters would tell you that the coastline by his place there is accreting at the rate of 2 metres a year.
Yeah, no, but we know that it
So
accretes.
how do
It's
we
called the
in a plan
Waimakariri
actually
River effect.
establish a coastline when we're accreting all the time?
No, it's where the base point is. So it's what's in front of it.
Yes, but if the toe is moving out into the sea all the time, our coastline, the line is going to be continually moving.
Yeah, that's right. But no, not necessarily. If the back point is the
yes.
base of the
That's not going to change.
No.
What will change will be the seaward side
That's right.
of the coast.
How do you establish the back point?
No, we're
Well, we've largely relied on the existing zoning of the Conservation 1A zone, and that largely runs along the back of the dune system.
That's decades old. Is it accurate?
It's just a pragmatic management approach at this stage.
For planning, but complicated for local residents when they want to do something.
Well, of course, it's public land too, so you know, I'm not quite sure.
Some properties there would transpose your back end of the sand dune line.
further down. There is a very indistinct boundary between the coastline and those properties down the end of
Rocking Horse Road.
Rocking Horse Road. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's quite a pragmatic problem down there where you are creating an arbitrary line that in many places will bisect a number of properties.
I think it's inappropriate to say you are creating an arbitrary line.
Are.
The truth is that we are required to have a coastal environment. It exists. And there is an area where it is a very difficult line to actually see. You know, I mean, when you're crossing, when you're in a kayak and you're going across the estuary, then at some point you move from the Christchurch or the Banks Peninsula electorate and into the Christchurch East electorate, but I bet you can't see that line. So, I mean, sometimes, a line on a map in terms of what you can see on the ground, it isn't clear.
Well, the
Correct.
line's on the map for the boundary as well.
And
Yeah.
that's why we encourage people to make submissions where they may have a property where they think the line is in the wrong place, they should
Yep.
put a submission in.
Yep.
So
Phil.
can I just wanted to ask a question, it's around just a clarification for people around this. Do we have measurements which sort of track the movement in terms of, so that in fact there's like a zone around the dunes? Do we have key points so we know where in fact it?
There is monitoring carried out by the regional council in terms of the movement and the accretion or otherwise of the whole beach system there. That hasn't per se informed the boundary of the zone, but has certainly informed the assessment of coastal hazards in that area.
So we'll look at those things when we come to hazards.
So that's enabled, the measurement of the beach profile over decades, of about 30 years.
Thank
Go back
you.
a century, there were no centuries.
Because it's so relevant.
So
Eh?
we just moving on to this slide here, this shows a little piece of the coastal zone at Taylor's Mistake, where there's a mix there of the sandy and rocky shoreline. And the batch settlements effectively are also caught by this coastal zone. You've heard a lot about that aspect of the zone through the residential chapter, and the actual batches are scheduled, and the map is attached to this zone as well. So we're sort of, again, another sort of crossover.
This is what the working party did. But, yeah.
The working party looked at schedule and so on, this coastal zone, we took this into account, but this isn't so much the work of the working party.
That's right.
The schedule and batches.
The residential chapter dealt with the batches themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yanni?
Just wanted to check on those batches, that's also going through stage 1,
No,
that's
stage 2,
2? Okay, I
which
thought
will
there
be
was some-
notified on the 2nd of May.
I thought but the people I've talked to from the batches said that they've already been going to the independent hearings panel.
No.
That was in relation to those batches that are affected by slope stability hazards as part of the first part
Okay.
of the natural hazards chapter, so yes.
So where's that got to in terms of the independent
There's
hearings
no
panel?
decision being made by the independent hearings panel at this stage.
Okay. And then the other thing that was raised with us probably some time ago was the need to protect or maybe recognise special surfing sites within Christchurch. I don't remember if either of you recall that deputation or submission we had to council, where the surfers actually wanted us to acknowledge areas along the coast that were special for surfing, basically. And I just wanted to see where that had got to and if that had fed in or whether this is the appropriate chapter
Yeah,
to consider.
that will be landward of the council's territorial boundary, which is the mean high water springs or the highest wet part of the beach. So
Seaward.
yeah, the seaward, within the Environment Canterbury's jurisdiction.
So it's the coastal management area, that's ECAN.
Righto.
Okay, and this is just showing you a shot of Akaroa, and at this
gorgeous.
stage, it's very picturesque. Some settlements are also
Isn't it lovely?
located within
It looks
the
beautiful,
policy coastal environment overlay. We've got an open mind about that, but again, it's only those activities that trigger a resource consent which would then be considered also under these two objectives and policies in this chapter.
Yep.
On this one is so we need to put in more objectives about Littleton, about reverse sensitivity.
That is dealt with through largely through, I think, the residential chapter. There's already the reasonably restrictive controls on development in that area in the Littleton settlement, and the noise sensitivity activities that's dealt with in that chapter.
Yeah, and
But in the
due
policy-
to Andrew being away at the time, I've got a proposed memorandum for you, which I haven't signed off yet, but it's coming. So just basically, we discussed this the other day, and we were very mindful of the fact that you weren't here and you'd raised the issue. So I'm going to be sending you a memo about how we might encourage people in the Littleton area to actually make submissions to the independent hearings panel on the subject. Yeah.
But it was just in that policy one
Yes.
on page 13.
Yes.
So we're accepting within the area occupied by the Port of Littleton, and in light of the changes that we made.
What page?
Page 13. I think.
Of chapter 19.
Yeah. So we're excluding the port from
Mine doesn't go that far.
nature scale. It's in the section 32.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes.
So you're not referring to the chapter
The
page?
first page of the chapter, probably.
So it excludes the port from things like nature scale intensity and in a location that preserves and enhances the natural character and heritage of coastal environment. And then goes, so it excludes it from quite a lot, but it's not mentioned around the like limiting the reverse sensitivity issues on the coastal area, which in light of the previous decision, we should try and be consistent. So I just wondered if you've looked at.
We have looked at that, and we've tried to work in with other chapters, and particularly when we first looked at that, there was consideration given to a special port zone. Of course, now I think there's in a recent decision, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that a recovery plan is going to be provided for the port. So we'll continue to keep that in mind if we need to alter that policy to recognise it. But as I said, those port-sensitive activities are still being addressed through the residential chapter, and that's continued from the existing provisions.
But I'd like it, I personally feel that we shouldn't exclude the port, because I think the relationship between the port and the coastal environment is really critical to recognise a number of things.
But actually, that's why the Littleton Port Recovery Plan is being led by ECAN. That's what I thought.
Well, then maybe we should just, when it comes back to us, can we just get maybe a one-pager on why we would give the port special exemptions in this policy if there's another process underway? Because my preference would be to leave the port as not being accepted, because I actually think the things in here are actually really important, regardless of whether the port's there or not.
Well, it's a working port, so you can't put all of these overlays on a working port. The working port issues are being dealt with in two other chapters. One is residential, and the other is the Littleton Port Recovery Plan.
We've got the port recovery plan, so its own process. It's not part of the district plan review.
Yeah, but it will be. It will be. It will be submitted when it's completed.
It will be
So-
included.
But we haven't even made a submission around that.
No, I know
so
that,
why
but
would we be putting things into our district plan
We've
now?
already agreed last week or earlier this week that we would do it as part of DPR. No. We wouldn't submit it now. We would submit the plan that is completed once it's been through the signing off process. It'll be dealt with in the time frame.
So why would you put exceptions in now ahead of that process, ahead of us even having a collective submission
There is
on that
no
process?
reason why we can't amend this later if that was the appropriate thing to do. But there is no way that you can make the Port of Littleton subject to all of these requirements when we know that it's going to be dealt with in another way.
Well, that's the point I'm making. So we've agreed not to do it as part of DPR. So if you're a member of the public and you live in Littleton and you get this coming through your letterbox, you're probably likely to make submissions. But the whole point of what we did last week was to have one process to determine what the port
I don't
can
think
accomplish.
anyone's going to think that this is a separate process from that. I mean, why on earth would they? I've already just highlighted that there are some noise issues that need to be addressed, and we're going to talk to Andrew about encouraging submissions from his area in that regard. I can't see the point of creating a coastal environment policy conflict, which would be a conflict if we ended up in the situation.
Through you, Madam Chair,
Yep.
what we could suggest potentially is just leave the policy, but take out the words "except within the area occupied by the Port of Littleton," so that the policy just relates to all infrastructure.
So we could actually, if I could carry on there, that something that we've benefited from is that this was a stage 2 chapter. It has received ministers' comments, And one of the strong comments coming through that I was going to make a recommendation on is to, after the word development in this policy 1913, is to say including infrastructure, because the ministers are asking for recognition of infrastructure in the coastal environment, and that might be a way of kind of trading off the concerns that Councillor Johansson has by taking out that exception part.
So where does the infrastructure go in?
So after, we'd say ensure that subdivision use and development, including infrastructure, within the coastal environment is at a scale, and drop the wording except within that area occupied by the Port of Lyttelton. So it's not singling out Port of Lyttelton per se, but it is giving recognition to infrastructure, including, and the
It
port is-
generalises it more.
Except that, then you've got the port. I mean, I agree with the aspects, but you've got a port that has to be of a nature scale, intensity and location that preserves and enhances the natural character and heritage of the coastal environment. When in fact it's a working port.
Well, exactly.
Sorry.
And I mean, the reality is that anything in the Lyttelton Port Recovery Plan that conflicts with this will override it anyway.
Exactly.
Council has got the ability, it's coming up in the next couple of weeks, to make its submission on the Lyttelton Port Recovery Plan. There's a submission panel meeting tabled, and it's actually a joint submissions panel between the Council's working group and the submissions panel. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to make comments on the Port Recovery Plan aspect of this at that time. And anything that goes in the Port Recovery Plan, by the statutory nature of the Recovery Plan, will override anything in the District Plan Review chapters anyway.
Yes.
So I think that needs to be understood in the context of the discussion that we're having.
Yeah, Phil.
I just want to ask you about bottom page 7.
Well, can we deal with this first? I mean, are we going to leave those words in or take them out?
Oh, sorry.
Well, we're not making this.
No.
No, I know.
That's what I thought.
I think when it comes back, it would just be good to have a little bit more clarity about the minister's comments.
Yeah.
Then the alignment between the recovery plan for the port and this. I mean, you know.
We can do
Okay,
that.
all right.
I think that's
Yep,
really
Phil. Page 7.
I just want to flag this. I had some discussion with Helen about the natural hazards part, but on page 7, in the coastal environment, chapter 19 document, with the reference to reduced risk from hazards, and is issue number 3, and it's it's written as including coastal erosion, and is likely to be exacerbated by climate change, and it's my understanding that in fact that specifically that should be erosion from some areas, some parts, and then the sediment or sand moves to other parts. So we might deal with it, and I'm just flagging it really, we might deal with the natural hazards part too, but it just seems to me that probably isn't entirely specifically accurate.
Can I clarify?
And I'm just flagging it.
Are you looking at the Section 32 report or what?
What page are you on of which document?
It's chapter 19, section 32.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Sorry,
And what page? Page 7.
page 7. And I'm just flagging it, and I don't want to start a whole great big debate about it, because
Yes.
I know they've got plenty to do.
I'm aware of your discussion, and
Yeah.
you're quite right, and we can amend that.
Thank you.
Sea level rise is not the only cause of erosion on the coast, basically, is what you're saying, and you're quite correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
All right.
Next one.
Now, okay.